Welcome back for our theory lesson this month. Last month, we talked about melody a little bit, thinking about riffs. And this month, we're going to start to think about the bass line, because the bass line is really a really important part of what's going on. The bass gives us that foundation. The drummer gives us a pulse, and the bass gives us a harmonic foundation. So with the exception of solo jazz pianists and the occasional jazz duo, like perhaps two guitars or a guitar and a horn or something like that, most jazz groups have a bass player. Jazz bass players usually create their own bass lines from the information provided by the chord symbols. However, it is important for any jazz musician who wants a complete understanding of jazz harmony to be able to write appropriate bass lines. Ideally, a jazz bass line will be a true melody, perhaps simpler than the lead part, but a melody nonetheless. As with melody in general, writing a good bass line is an art. However, one can make a good start toward the development of a successful bass line by following a few simple guidelines. Assuming a half-note harmonic rhythm, or in other words, saying that the chord or harmony changes every 2 beats, we can use the following procedure. The first thing you want to do is place the roots of the indicated chords on the beats 1 and 3 to create the skeleton of the bass line. As far as possible, select the root notes so that the interval between them is minimized. Or in other words, choose a 4th up rather than a 5th down, or a 3rd down rather than a 6th up. So we see here this chord progression of F6, D minor 7, G minor 7, C7, A minor 7, A flat 7, G minor 7, G flat 7, and then back to F6. Notice that there are some common chords like that G chord, but the G's are in different places. That we had gone from the F down to the D, because if we had gone up to the D, that would have been a 6th up instead of a 3rd down. So they went to the closest D. Then they went to the closest G, which was a 4th up instead of a 5th down. Now, moving to C, the reason that they would have moved to 5th down instead of a 4th up is because often bass lines we want to keep below the ledger lines, the upper ledger lines in the bass, because then it starts to sound more like a guitar and a little bit more thin. So they've gone from that G down to the C, and then down a 3rd, and then down a semitone, and then down another semitone, and down another semitone. And they could go down to F, but they're going back to where they started. So I'm willing to bet that if this chord progression went on, it would start again with F6, D minor 7, so on and so on. So if we just played the bass notes, they would sound something like this. Great. So the next step is to fill in beats 2 and 4 according to the interval between the notes on beats 1 and 3. So check out the audio example here of this new updated bass line, and then we'll talk about what's going on. Great. So the different intervallic situations and their solutions are as follows. So first of all, as we see in this first bar, if the roots are separated by a third, in this case an F and a D, we put a diatonic passing tone between them. Remember, diatonic basically means in the key of. In measure 1, we insert an E between F and D. And from measure 2 to measure 3, we insert a B flat between C and A. That B flat's in the key signature. So that sort of sounds here from that F to D. You have this descending line. And then the same thing happens between C and A, a similar ascending line. Great. If the roots are separated by a fourth or a fifth, fill out the interval with the tone drawn from the first chord. So in measure 1, we insert an F between the D and the G in the following measure. And in measure 2, we insert a D between G and C. D minor 7th chord to our G7 chord. We want to make sure that that moving note before the G minor 7th chord is a note that exists in D minor. And similarly to the first one, we want to approach the next chord by step. So there's really two notes possible moving that are in between D and G, and that would be our E and our F. But the F is the only of those two notes that occurs in D minor. Additionally, it is just one note away from G, which is less important than the D minor point, but it is important as well. As we look at bar 2 as well, we're moving from G down to C. And in a G minor 7th triad, we have a G, we have a B, we have a D, and we have an F. So F wouldn't be a good choice. B would be odd because we'd be going lower than the C to come back up and then move downwards again, although it is a possibility. But D is closer to G, and it's right beside that C as well. So we get this type of feeling. Now, if the roots are separated by a major or minor second, repeat the bass note as shown in measures 3 and 4. So as we're moving through measures 3 and 4, we have this semitone movement from A to A flat to G flat, and then down to F as well. So what they do is they repeat the note. They don't change notes. So as we're going A flat, G flat, F, we just repeat it. Very, very simple. Now, if a chord is held for the entire duration of the measure, the bass line can be filled out with a scale-wise line from the root of the chord down to the fifth of the chord. So we hear that here, going F, E, D, C, C being the fifth of that chord. Now, finally, look for opportunities to smooth out the bass line through judicious use of the third, fifth, or seventh of a chord, or non-chord tones. Here, for example, the scale-wise line in measure 1 is continued downward through C, the seventh of that D minor 7th chord, to the B flat on the first beat of measure 2. This movement puts the root of the G minor 7th chord on the second beat of measure 2, which is perfectly acceptable. So we see here, instead of going in G, which is what we originally did, it goes D, C, B flat, G. That B flat is the third in that G minor chord, so it fits there as well, and then we come down to the G. This method is unlikely to produce a bass line with the fire and drive of one by a Ray Brown or a Charles Mingus, but a competent bass player will be able to make the line swing, and it will adequately support the harmony of a piece. So, your assignment is going to be, I'm going to give you 2 different chord progressions, and I would like you to please write a bass line to go along with those chord progressions in the bass clef. See you next month.